So it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out for the show today. I appreciate it.
hmm
And I want to begin our conversation with what we've lived through for the last 3.5 years or so, getting through a global pandemic. How did you get through
hmm
it, and how did it change you?
Um, I want to joke and say Xanax, but also that, um, because I had, my two kids were home, for a lot of the pandemic, especially in those early days where school districts didn't know what to do. Um, and my husband and I both quickly realized that we are not capable of educating both of them on their own as teachers. So homeschooling is never an option for us. It was a really good litmus test for like, could we ever do that? The answer is no. Um, and I realized how resilient everybody is. In those early days, it was really interesting to see the people who made a lot of money off of the pandemic by like hoarding things like toilet paper, versus the people who would check in on their neighbors, the people who were like, hey, I haven't seen you step outside in a few days. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Um, one of my neighbors actually got COVID around sometime like not too long after it appeared in Michigan. And here's me running over with like a pot of chicken soup. Like, I'm leaving this at your front door because I can't come in, but here you go. We're making sure that you're fed. You've got, you don't have to worry about this. Um, I like to think that that was one of the most positive things that came out of the pandemic. And I know that's something that definitely had a big effect on me in changing me. But I also just realized how resilient I am and how important it is to take care of yourself so that you can take care of others.
I thought about that word the whole time too, resiliency, and I thought it in terms of my kids. My son's on the spectrum. He's 18, and my stepdaughter, you know, I kept thinking that no matter what happens, the younger generation is going to have a level of being able to cope with things not working the way that they thought it was going to work. Or, yeah.
And
So,
it makes a lot of sense. My oldest is also on the spectrum. He's 11,
okay.
almost 12. And watching him try to go with the flow, which is not easy for anybody on the spectrum, like those typically people on the spectrum, really anyone who's neurodivergent, we have a hard time transitioning to
Yep.
different things. And my son, when we were doing cohorts, I would get a text message from his teacher because he left class, just like full on closed his
Yep.
computer and was like, peace out, I'm done. I don't need to listen to this. Mostly because he would get angry about something. And I'm like, all right, hang on, let me check with my niece who was, helping him. And um, I see the impact that it had on him and it like almost it forced him to be less rigid
Yeah.
and have a little bit more of that fluid thinking.
Yeah. Because they are creatures of habit. They want things to be in a line. And when that goes away, and it wasn't just that it was one or two things or one or two continents, it was the entire world and it was everything, every single thing.
hmm
Because I remember when it happened, it was like his two favorite things in the world in March are school and the baseball season starting. And that all went away,
hmm
you know, and then everything else was affected. And there were so many things that went into it. But I think at the end of the day, that's what I kept holding on to, that word resiliency. And it's good for us adults too to be able to have a dose of that as well. So it's a good thing.
I've never been more grateful for Pokemon Go in my life because we
Yeah.
have we have a walking trail near our house, and I would fire up the hotspot on my phone, because in Michigan we could still go out and do things, like you could still go out and walk, which I think that exercise, like getting those endorphins running, helped. But my kids would bring their tablets with them and they would catch Pokemon
Yep.
as we would walk. And my husband and I would, walk the dogs, touch base with each other while our kids were like, I caught another one.
Yep.
Look, I'm morphing into this. And now it's, 3.5 years later, and my kids are still playing Pokemon Go. But I
Yep.
don't have to fire up my hotspot because now they have phones.
That's right. So you're a cheerleader, you're a motivator, and I want to know, if I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day at a grade school, and one of the kids looked up and asked you curiously, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that child?
Oh goodness. I tell them that I do a lot of things because this something similar has happened. I run a digital marketing agency. I own my own agency. I turned my love for baking and making chocolate into a side hustle. So I take my ADHD and I put it to the test and just continue learning so that I can keep growing. That's my job, is to continue learning.
Yeah. So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
I wanted to be the president of the United States.
All right. Do you
And
have
I'm
any?
so glad I don't have that
Right.
position right now.
That's what happens when you get older. It's like all of that. You're like, what was I thinking? So did you ever do
Mhm.
anything politically?
Um, yes and no. So I have a background in counterterrorism. It's what I went to college for. It's what my degree is in. Well, it's part of what my degree is in. I never had any other interest in running for public office. Even now in our school district, people are asking me if I ever want to run for the school board, to which my answer is no, no thanks. I'm good on the PTSA side or the PTA side. I do a lot within the PTA, but I could not imagine myself having the composure to run for politics, much less being in a political position. With my mouth, I would get myself censured all the time.
So who's been a hero for you in your life?
Um, my grandparents, they were all of them were Holocaust survivors. My two step grandmothers survived the Great Depression. So when I look at the six grandparents that I knew, plus all of the others that I've like inherited throughout my life, there was nothing like going back to that word resilient, there's nothing that can compare to that generation. I'm a third generation Holocaust speaker as well. So I speak about my grandparents' stories, the effect that it had on me as a kid. Um, and I always come back to this idea that they had this innate ability to compartmentalize when necessary from all of the trauma that they went through, and then still manage to look like fully functional adults. So for me, watching my grandparents as immigrants in this country, not seeing the struggle they had as immigrants, but seeing how they flourished, really just like lit a fire under me um, to use the privilege that I have to make the most of my life here.
I'm going to preface this question with this. So when you hear about these people that are like flat earth society people, and we know that we have a globe, okay? We live on a circle.
Uh-huh.
I don't understand how delusional you can be to believe that. So my question is, more and more, like I've been to the Holocaust Museum in DC and
Mm-hmm.
felt how moving that is. We had an exhibit that came through Kansas City recently. How can you be somebody like Kanye West or these other bozos that genuinely say that an event in history did not take place? Is it a level of mental delusion and illness that how do you get in your estimation of having grandparents that lived through something that empirically happened, not
Mm-hmm.
supposedly, not vapor, kind of like Sandy Hook with Alex Jones? How do you get to that delusional point in your estimation?
You drink a lot of the Kool-Aid, a lot of the Kool-Aid that says everything that you're seeing is an illusion and everything that you're seeing is a byproduct of what the government wants you to see. Yeah, look, I got to use my my education for something because I studied people who historically don't believe that big events happen, that this was some kind of conspiracy. On some level, I'm sure it is mental illness. Um, it's okay to have a healthy distrust for some of the things that you're seeing. Like we all know that the media tends to show us whatever they want us to see. But at the same time, we can't just like completely disregard the facts that we're seeing, whether it's in the news, whether it's historical. I get into these like social media conversations all the time when it comes to like, no, this is historical fact.
Yeah.
This actually happened. Um, And I see that delusion happening younger and younger, where my son's in 5th grade, my youngest one, and in 4th grade, some kid, they were reading a book, I think it's The Number in Our Stars. And some kid said, "Well, it couldn't have really been that bad." And my child whipped his head around and said, "You have no idea." He's been to the Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Detroit. Um, my grandmother is in their Portrait of Honors exhibit. And he said, "You have no idea. You're reading a fictional book right now, but you should read some of the books that are um, like memoirs,
Yeah.
and some of those are terrifying." And this kid was like, I mean, I don't really know." And he said, "Then you should talk to a survivor,
Yeah.
because it's when you hear them, it's really hard. It's really hard to say to somebody like eye to eye, what you experienced didn't happen."
Yeah. Yeah, I even think about with Sandy Hook, I have a jazz radio show, and there was a musician that
Hmm.
I interviewed, and his daughter was there that day, and he lost his
Right.
daughter. And it's like, I couldn't even talk about it. I didn't even want to talk about it. And to even be somebody that would broach the fact that that was conspiratorial, it's just such a denigration of humanity. It's like a pastor that fleeces the congregation. It's like, how do you look in the face of a creator or something
Hmm.
magnanimous and just completely disregard it? It defies logic. But I think too, we have an oversaturation, and I think it's really a lot of this is like the media. Like there was a kid the other day that was at the Chiefs game in LA, and he had a headdress. And have you heard about this story?
Mm-mm.
And his face was painted up. Half of it was black, half of it was red, and he had a Chiefs headdress on. And a media outlet came out and said he was doing blackface. It's awful. It's abhorrent. Yeah. So they were throwing this kid under the bus. Turns out that he was up doing the tomahawk chop. All of the black football players were following his lead. The kid's Native American, and he was that close to getting totally railroaded and cancel cultured by some bozo at a news agency that sent out some unvalidated news report. So I think that's the problem, is that we've become reckless. And I remember Carl Castle. He was an NPR correspondent that was on in the
Mhm.
morning edition for years and years. And it was his last day, and they asked him, "What's the most important thing that you learn as a journalist all of these decades?" And he said, "You never, ever, ever report a story unless you have two absolutely verified sources. And if you have to sweat it out for 24 hours and another news agency beats you, you have to make sure that that's valid." And I think that level of journalistic integrity is eroding.
So you mentioned journalistic integrity, and that's what's going through my mind through so many things right now, especially with the story you just shared, that we're lacking journalistic integrity across the globe. Not only that, but we also used to have politicians that didn't showboat. They did to a certain extent, but not to the extent that they're doing so now. You know, you would have your what is it, they would go on their stumping trail, whatever like on the way back on the trains.
The stump
And
speech, yeah.
yes, thank you. And they would talk about the things that they wanted to do, the change that they wanted to see, but rarely did you hear them throw people under the bus. And over the last 20, 30 years, we've gone from having real like presidential debates versus um whatever we're seeing now on television.
Buffoonery. Civil
Like,
discourse to buffoonery.
and the amount of placating we're doing to the audience in assuming that they don't have the intelligence to really understand what's happening in their world is sad and astonishing at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember Mike Judge, the Beavis and Butthead creator, he made a
Hmm.
movie doing a parody of America in the future, and it's turned into it. It's like frightening. It's kind of like those vignettes of Back to the Future when they were showing the future and how wacky
Hmm.
and weird it was. It's happened. It's here. And yeah, it's bizarre.
It is. And it's interesting though, because coming from the culture that I come from and the faith that I come from, where um it's hard being like a Jewish person, always,
Hmm.
especially now. I don't think there's ever a time on this planet where it's not hard to be Jewish, but it's much harder now. Um, and then having to talk about that with people who don't have this lived experience
Yeah.
is also quite challenging. But then they'll talk to me about stuff that's going on in the world, and I have to look at them and say, where are you finding your sources? Like historically, 90% of what you've said is inaccurate. Um, but people won't take my word for it because they're like, well, of course you'll say it's inaccurate, you're Jewish. And we just like automatically disregard people because of their faith or because of where they come from. And it's it like if I dwell on that too long, it's very sad. And it's hard to raise kids in that kind of environment. But
Uh-huh.
then at the same time, having these two wonderful human beings who just want everybody to like them and want to like everybody, and they're both in very diverse schools. Um, Having to see that they don't have to fight as hard in their young age to just be is kind of nice.
Yeah.
And I love that when the world gets really dark and scary, I can just turn to the stuff that they're dealing with and say, cool, let's break it down, or let's try to have a fun day
Yeah.
and not have to worry about the outside world as much.
I think that's the thing that's refreshing about my son being on the spectrum is he doesn't get all hung up on all of those things, you know.
Hmm.
There's a simplicity to the way that his mind rolls and who he is. Yeah, I'm astonished at how the Jewish culture has come under fire all of a sudden. Women's rights are getting taken away. Things are being said about black people that were never said before after having 8 years of a black president. Like there's a level of I think at the end it's astonishing, but I think what happens is I think the collective karma and the collective good of this planet is going to make things right. And it always finds a way to do because the darkness will always find a way in, but
Hmm.
the collective light, it will find a way to just blast it out. So that's my hope.
And I think that's why I love the holiday season so much. We're finally in December, and although there was snow on the ground in Michigan yesterday, now it's raining, so it's all gone. But this idea of holiday cheer, and while not everybody is so cheery during the holidays, um, the world feels brighter.
Yeah.
People feel even like they're a tad nicer. And for for myself, a lot of my friends too, we feel like if you could be this nice in December, could you maybe do that all year round?
Yeah.
Like we have this innate ability to change who we are and change our perceptions of things. Um, so you can, in fact, turn around and say, you know what, I'm just going to be nicer to everybody. Everybody just needs a break right now,
Yeah.
and and then do it and put it into action.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I love the holiday season.
Yeah.
It's a little bit brighter, even though it's cold and dreary.
Yeah, absolutely. To the yin and yang. So let me ask you
Hmm.
this. If you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now and spend some time with them, someone inspirational that you look up to, who would it be?
I could meet anybody alive on the planet. Um, I have a friend who is Israeli, who is an Israeli Palestinian, who lived in Gaza. He has UK citizenship too. I want to meet his grandma.
Yeah.
In college, he would tell me some of the coolest stories about his grandma. Um, I would just want to spend time with her.
Yeah.
There is so much to learn from the older generations. And, unfortunately, all of my grandparents are gone. All of my surrogate grandparents are also gone. So I would want to spend time with her. She is fierce. She is this like no holds barred, I'm not giving in to anybody um, type of woman. And there's something to really be celebrated about that. She's this, from all the stories he's told me, like, yes, she's loving and sweet, like you expect a grandmother to be. Um, but she will also like whip your tuchus into shape if she feels like you are not living up to your own potential. So I would
Yeah.
want to meet her.
Yeah. So what is it for you every day? What is your motivation to get out of bed and to accomplish what you want to get done as a professional and to be you. What is that for you?
I don't know, with ADHD, it's often a struggle to get out of bed,
Yeah,
especially when it's cold outside and I'm like, "Oh, everything is so nice and cozy here."
yeah.
The thing that gets me out of bed is usually I have to get the kids up. My husband and I have to tag team to get them up and get ready for their day. But then as I'm going through those motions, I'm thinking about, well, what do I need to accomplish today? And I like to just be able to make my own mental lists of here's all the things I need to do or that I know I need to do, transfer that onto paper and go, cool, what can I actually do? And how am I going to make the biggest impact in this day possible? And
So
I live for that. Like, what is that impact that you can do? Even the small things can have a big impact. So, what can I do daily that has that impact?
absolutely. So let me ask you this. If you were to have a dream tonight, you ran into like the senior in high school version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the wisdom you've gained so far in your life, what advice would you dispense on that young version of you?
I would tell her to smile more. I would tell her to not be so gruff and to be a little bit more approachable. Um, and that, like, yeah, things are going to get hard. Things are hard. They will always be hard. But, you've got this perseverance, this almost like survivor mentality. You'll be okay. Like, just keep going.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, goodness. The best advice, I think the best advice would be, was from my grandmother to learn computers. I was going to school to be a hairdresser, and it was like 1999, 2000, and my grandmother says, "You need to learn computers." And she was this little Polish lady who scared the crap out of everybody,
Yeah.
because she could be wonderful and approachable and loving and terrifying at the same time. But she said, "You need to learn computers." And I said, "I know how to use a computer." And she said, "No, no, no. You need to know how to use computers." So I went back to school to learn to code, and that changed the course of my entire life.
Yeah.
I realized I hated coding. I did love the understanding of, like, search engines were so new back then. Why were people searching? Why are you using the internet to look for anything? Because the internet was such a baby. Um, and that just changed the trajectory of my life.
So, of all of the things aside from being a mom and having a family, of all of the things that you've done in your life, what are you the proudest of? Maybe professionally speaking.
Um, Actually, the stuff that I'm really proud of is not really on like a professional level. I love the work that I do. I love, making my clients happy and helping them find new clients, new business. But the most fulfilling work is the volunteer stuff that I do, all of the work in the PTA. I now sit as the PTSA council president for our entire council, that's like all 19 schools. And I'm really proud of the work that I've done within my community to help, whether it was through the pandemic and helping our school families, our elementary school families navigate what they need and what the district can give them, or helping our teachers stay hydrated and well fed during conferences because it's the longest day of the year for them,
Yeah.
to advocating for our students and finding ways to make that impact. That's the work that I'm really proud of because those are the things that at the end of the day, um, even if they're small things, they're still agents of change that will hopefully change things for the better. And I also think sharing my grandparents' stories, that's something for me to be very proud of because they went through hell. They went through absolute hell, and in some cases didn't want to share their stories. And I get to teach the next generations what it was like having grandparents that survived the absolute worst of humanity, the worst experiences possible, what it was like in many cases to be partially raised by them. While I have really amazing parents, my grandparents had a huge hand in my upbringing for myself, all my siblings, my cousins. And that's something that I don't necessarily see like my kids have wonderful grandparents too, but I was at my grandparents' house at least once a week. My kids, they don't always see their grandparents, and being able to share what it was like growing up with these Holocaust surviving grandparents and being able to relay their stories for those generations keeps their memories alive. It keeps the memories of their families that they lost alive. So it's for me, I think that's the other thing I'm the most proud of.
So let's say we get off the phone and a time machine pulls up in front of your house, and you can go anywhere in history and see one event with your own eyes. Where are you going? What would you love to see?
I want to go back to my middle sister's wedding.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's cool.
Not like I love these like big historical events, but I don't necessarily think I would be equipped enough to go see that. But if I could go back to my sister Kim's wedding, I would be able to see so many relatives that I haven't seen in a long time. And it's nice to be able to go back to a time when things were like when it's like a happy memory.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So everyone out there has a perception of you. You have all these roles you play in life. Family, friends, clients, colleagues, but ultimately you're in control of all of it. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I am unabashedly authentic, unique myself. I don't make apologies for who I am. Um, and I like to think that I'm an agent for change, but I'm also somebody who will lift people up in moments where they don't necessarily think they need it. But sometimes being able to lift somebody up when they're not just in like the lowest part of their life, sometimes they just, it's nice to be able to give somebody a compliment and say, you know what, you're doing a really awesome job, just sets them on like a happy tone. So I like to think that I'm a positive person um, that can help bring that to other people too.
What's the best thing about living in Detroit?
The food,
Oh, okay.
the food. A lot of people don't think that, Detroit has that much to offer or Metro Detroit has a lot to offer. Um, but I mean, I feel like we rival most of the other big cities on the different types of food that we have. We're such a diverse melting pot of cultures that we have so many different types of Asian foods and African foods and South American foods and American foods. Um, I love barbecue. I wish we had more barbecue places here that weren't just like chains, but were in my area at least that were like real down home barbecues. But I love the food here. It's amazing.
Have you been to Kansas City?
Hmm.
Okay, so you've had the barbecue.
I have.
Okay, so if you ever
I've
really,
had
what's
I've
that?
had barbecue from most of the places in the US that are like top barbecue places, and I actually think the best barbecue I've ever had was in Millington, Tennessee.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard about, so that would be kind of the Memphis style.
But I
Yeah,
love all of the styles.
yeah,
So I love Kansas City barbecue. That's the one that we actually have the most of here in Metro Detroit,
yeah,
is that Kansas City influence. Whereas like Texas is a little bit more about the dry rub.
yeah.
I don't love it as much. So for any Texans watching, I'm sorry. Um, but I also love that the way that Jewish people make brisket now compared to how we made brisket in like the 80s and before has changed dramatically because of barbecue. And
Yeah.
a lot of it is because of how Kansas City does their barbecue.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty it's the ripple effect. So, Hillary, if anyone wants to learn more about you, hire you, anything about your world, where do they go?
They go to ellieandjojo.co. So ELLIEN like Nancy, JOJO.co. That is my professional site. Or if they're in the Metro Detroit area, they can go to Trixie's Treats. The treats has a Z on the end instead of an S.com, and they can order baked goods.
Excellent. Hillary, thank you for your time. Thank you for your story. Have a great holiday season. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care.